Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. We're supposed to have an outstanding guest today. His name is Peter James, an author, a true crime author, an amazing author, has written so many New York Times bestsellers, and the book that we were going to speak about today is The Hawk is Dead, his latest book, in which he uses the character of Detective Superintendent Roy Grace. Roy Grace is one of the characters in many of his books. In fact, one of them that has garnered international fame. And I just see him. He's in the green room right now. Glad to see him. I'll invite him in a few minutes. But Peter James is just an unbelievable author. I can't believe that he's going to be on the show. 23 million books sold. That's a lot of pounds that equals, right? Anyway, the true crime genre, I think of how knowledgeable you have to be as a writer to write in that genre. There's a good picture of Peter James up on the screen. And how many hours he must have spent with both investigators, police, knowing police jargon, knowing the way police think, knowing how police investigate, knowing the science of policing, because that, in investigative terms, science and the technology that the police are using now is just absolutely unbelievable. So, folks, hold on to your hats, hold on to your loved ones, hold on to your thoughts, hold on to your prayers. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone.
There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
And without further ado, joining us now, internationally known author, Peter James. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
I hope I didn't overload that introduction so that now your head is getting a little bigger, but it's probably pretty big already. You've accomplished so much in your life.
It can just about contain my kind of ego, you know.
I see you're also into cars. You like to race cars. You're like, here's a picture of you with one of your cars. Look at that. What a great interest, huh?
That's a police car I donated to the Sussex Police for all the research help they gave me. And yeah, I actually raced an American car. I raced a 1962 Corvette C1.
Wow, very cool. Very, very cool. I want to get right into your latest book, The Hawk is Dead. And now, obviously, you wouldn't be able to write a book like this unless you had a hell of a lot of books behind this that have led you and brought you to this day. And of course, Camilla is a character in this book, or it sort of inspired you to write this. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, what happened was, it was about 10 years ago, a friend of mine rang me one day and said, whatever you're doing, stop doing it. Go out and buy a copy of the Daily Mail newspaper, which is our biggest selling paper. And there on page 3 was a photograph of Camilla, then Duchess of Cornwall, in her office with 2 of my Roy Grace novels right behind her head. And in the interview, she said, I was one of her 2 favorite authors. The other was Jane Austen. I thought, well, I'll take that. And I wrote her a thank you note. I just said, wow, I'm deeply honored. Thank you so much. And she wrote a really chatty 2-page letter back. And we started a correspondence. And over the next 3 years, she would write to me after every book of mine. I mean, she wrote and she said, I'm a real fan. I've read every single one of your Roy Grace books and your standalones. And about 2018, she wrote to me. She said, your last book kept me company all the way to Australia. I'm now bereft. I don't know what I'm going to read on the way home. And then she wrote to me and she said, when are you going to set a Roy Grace novel in London? And shortly after that, I met a senior member of the royal household. She had her first literary. She's got I'm sure many Americans know this. The Camilla started a book club during lockdown. It's called the Queen's Reading Room. It's on Instagram, and it features authors. She takes an author and features them for 2 weeks, and it's global. And she's done it to try to encourage people into reading. And she had her first literary festival at Hampton Court Palace 2 years ago, and I was asked to speak. And when I arrived there, I remember the household said, "You know, Her Majesty wrote to you suggesting setting a Roy Grace in London." Well, she'd actually, I think she'd rather like it if you had a murder in Buckingham Palace. And that was how it started.
Wow, very, very cool. And the book is The Hawk is Dead. As Brits and book lovers everywhere know, Queen Camilla is a dedicated champion of literature and an avid reader of murder mysteries, particularly gripping thrillers featuring Detective Superintendent Roy Grace. A few years ago, Her Majesty suggested to author Peter James, creator of the brilliant, excuse me for 1 second, I want to put this on the screen, Brighton-based copper, that he might set a Roy Grace novel in London. Seizing on the idea, James thought, where better than Buckingham Palace? In The Hawk is Dead, Peter James challenges Roy Grace with the biggest and most daunting case of his career, solving what at first appears to be an assassination attempt on the Queen. The story begins on November 20th, 2023, with Queen Camilla traveling on the royal train to the resort city of Brighton for a scheduled visit to the first of 2 hospices. What should have been a proud moment for the locals spirals into disaster when the train is derailed just north of the city inside a railway tunnel. Moments after the Queen and her entourage make it out to daylight, cell service, and the promise of safety, they are startled by a sharp cracking sound and a grisly shock, a head exploding, literally spattering blood, bone, and brain all over the Queen's clothing. The victim is Sir Peregrine Greaves, Her Majesty's trusted private secretary. Was poor Perry the intended target, or was, as everyone else believes, the sniper's bullet really meant for Queen Camilla? Whoa! what a plot there. And now all the possibilities of who did this, and more reality too, since Assassination has appeared back on the national stage with 2 attempted assassinations against President Trump and the completed assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
Makes this really, really, really realistic.
Thank you. Yeah, so what happens is that Roy Grace, is because it's on his turf, immediately comes to the scene. And everybody, as you say, assumes it's a failed assassination attempt on the Queen, except for Roy Grace, who says the private secretary was standing 4 feet from Her Majesty. He said a sniper might miss by 4 inches. He ain't going to miss by 4 feet. And it brings him into conflict with the king, because immediately the kind of royal protection team, the London police, the Met, struggle. They want to take control, but Roy Grace, it's his case. And the king summons him to Buckingham Palace, and I've got the king standing up, and he puts both hands in his pockets, and he says, how on earth can you say that this was not an assassination attempt on my wife? There's clearly a lunatic out there who's going to try again. And Roy Grace ultimately has kind of proved right when there's a second murder inside the palace and then a third. But I had different members of the royal household reading the book and helping me, including Queen Camilla gave me a lot of helpful information. And I had this scene in which King Charles stands up in his office and he digs his hands in his pockets. And I remember the household said, no, the king would only ever put one hand in his pocket.
Insider information, right?
Absolutely.
As far as, when you talk about someone being killed by a sniper, snipers are snipers because they're good at what they do. They can shoot, the size of a quarter from 1,000 yards. So when you say, yes, he missed by 4 feet, or no one would ever, that's not a sniper then. It was some hack that just decided to try to kill somebody.
Unless they were aiming at somebody else.
Right. Well, you're always the mystery writer. You're putting that in there. Now, being a writer, you have to know everything about police procedure, the science of policing, the investigative methods that the police use to capture people. What did you think of the recent robbery at the Louvre?
Well, it's fascinating. I'd be interested in your opinion. I think a lot of cops and former cops have a grudging respect when there's a really smart crime in which nobody's hurt. And that is like something out of crime fiction history. Basically stealing the French crown jewels, and in broad daylight from the most famous museum probably in the world. I have a kind of grudging respect for the guys that did it. People like criminals like that, and somebody who whacks an old lady over the head and takes her handbag, that is despicable. But there's a certain glamour about the Louvre robbery, I think. What do you think as an ex-police officer?
Yeah, I think, doing a robbery at a museum is a sexy crime, and it attracts people from all over the world. And the fact that they didn't hurt anyone, people sort of respect that too. Well, this is just a property crime. Who cares that it was 88 million pounds or $102 million in value, and the French history is all affected and stuff like that. What we want to know is, and I think worldwide, and this is my opinion, we are spoiled by how good the police are. What if right now there was no arrest? People would be going, these cops are horrible. They don't know what they're doing. They made an arrest pretty damn quickly, didn't they?
They sure did. I spent quite a bit of time in the past out with police in New York. I got friends with, you may know them, they're both retired now. In fact, one's sadly died. A homicide detective called Pat Lanigan, and another called Dennis Bootle.
I know, I've heard the names. I was in Manhattan North homicide for my last 10 years. I've been out 14 years. I don't like to say that because people can guess my age now, But yeah, no.
You don't look a day over 40,
Yeah, yeah, I'd like to believe that.
Yeah.
But
I think what fascinates me, and I go out with the police a lot. But I'm also asked by the police in England sometimes to write about things in order to publicize them to other people. In 2017, I was asked by the police in the county of Sussex, where I live and where my character Roy Grace is based. I was told that people in that county, just in that county alone, in the previous 12 months, had been conned out of close on $10 million by people they had met online looking for romance, internet dating scammers. And I was asked if I'd be interested to write one of my Roy Grace novels on this subject, and if I would, to help highlight it to people, not just in Sussex, but around the UK. They would show me their files, not the names of the victims. And I agreed because it fascinated me, and I was astonished. And the smallest amount any victim lost was $35,000, and the largest amount was over $600,000.
Wow.
And then another occasion, I met police, and I don't. If you use them in New York, it happened. We had big riots in London in 2014, and all the rioters were wearing baseball caps and hoodies. And the police there was a guy he wasn't actually a police officer, he was support staff, but he turned out to be what they call a super recognizer. He literally just could watch videos of the rioters, and he could identify somebody just from one feature, like an earlobe or the shape of their lips or the tip of their nose. And his identification led to 150 arrests and convictions. And they discovered there's like a tiny percentage of the population have this talent or this ability. And they were trying to recruit, and they asked if I would write about it and to help highlight it and make people aware. And they had many recruits applied after reading my book. So I was really happy about that.
James, some of what's sort of strange in Peter, Peter James, there's two first names. It gets confusing.
I know, it confuses everybody.
One of the things I want to say is that technology is unbelievable in law enforcement and other things too. But one of the things that is just amazing, and we saw it used in the Louvre robbery, is DNA technology and how quickly they can get the DNA information back. And in this case, not only did they identify the two perpetrators, they got them by name. So they were in the database, the French database. In the US, it's called CODIS, Combined DNA Index System, which is run by the FBI. I don't know specifically what it's called in France, but in the US, there's two categories of DNA: offender DNA, which is if you're arrested and convicted of certain crimes, you have no choice. Your DNA goes into the database. And forensic DNA, DNA from crime scenes that is yet to be identified. So these two robbers were in the database, and brilliant. They had them identified within a couple of days. And then the hunt, of course, goes on. But there's a lot of other things that leads to. Now you get these two perpetrators. And what does every person on this earth have, unless maybe they're in the Congo? They have a cell phone. And your cell phone is just a library of all the people you know. So what other two people do you think are in that library? The other two perpetrators. You have to be in there. And also some of their other associates who they perhaps have been working with on. I think there's a lot more than 4 people involved in this robbery.
I think that police and villains are always playing catch up. For instance, with DNA, as you're just referring to, when that started becoming common knowledge that it was being used, the villains would wear kind of rubber gloves, but then the dumb villains would often take the gloves off and throw them in the bins. You don't get the DNA from the inside the gloves. And it's the same with phones. We leave so many. Funny enough, when I first wrote my first Roy Grace novel back in 2004, the high-tech crime unit of Sussex Police consisted of 4 geeks who spent all day long sadly looking at kiddie porn on seized computers, and 1 traffic sergeant, because he was the only one who's computer literate. It's now the biggest department in every police force in the UK. They call it digital forensics now, and it is it's pretty much the beating heart of almost any homicide investigation now. It's because everything with the phone, you have complete footprints, and even if you turn all the tracking in the phone off, you're still leaving footprints, and I find that fascinating.
No, I do too. And I don't know if you followed the Idaho case, the Idaho 4 that were murdered, the students that were murdered by a perpetrator named Brian Koberger. And the biggest clue on that was that he left DNA on the button of the knife sheath that he left beside one of the bodies. And that really, to me, was the smoking gun in this case. But yet, Peter, there's people that still believe he's innocent, even though he left DNA. Oh, the cops planted it,
I know, you can't win. Actually, somebody who's really into technology is King Charles. I had, during the writing of The Hawk is Dead, I had this huge access. I was given a 3.5-hour tour around the palace before I started work on the book. And then another 3.5-hour tour at the end, because I have a huge chase through the palace. But the king he's investing a huge amount of money in something called they call it an anaerobic digester, which basically put all waste into it, and it turns the waste, literally it composts it into heat, and then the heat in turn powers generators which pump hot water back into the palace, and it's extraordinary. You see this. I think Buckingham Palace is probably one of the most famous buildings on the planet, and it dates back, 2 centuries, and yet it's got all this kind of high tech lurking behind its walls, and some very low tech as well. I heard the late Queen Elizabeth, her bedroom suite and a private apartment was on the north wing of the palace, and the palace is enormous. I put my tracker on when I walked around the first time. I walked 3.5 miles. and the Queen's sort of private apartment. She had to walk 100 yards down this corridor to her office and sitting room. And she would walk up and down that several times a day for 70 years of her reign. And when they dug up the floorboards recently because they're replacing all the piping, and they discovered that a whole section of floorboards, at some point in the 100 years back or so, somebody had used them for sawing wood on, and they were half sawn through. If she'd had a tantrum and jumped up and down, she'd have done a Monty Python and gone straight through.
Good thing she kept her weight in check, and then she would have went right
Absolutely.
through the
I had a great
stairwell.
comment from Prince. I asked a member of the royal household who was showing me around. I said, "Yeah, because you've got this vast basement, it goes on, and then all the corridors, and they go on forever." I said, "How do you ever learn to navigate in this palace?" And he said, "I asked Prince Philip that question about 18 years ago, and he said, 'Dear boy, it's very simple. You navigate by the paintings.'" I mean, don't you navigate by the paintings in your home? I mean, I know I do.
Oh, yes, right, exactly. Everyone has a phone that big. So with your writing, if you don't stay up to date with all the technology, all the police procedures, all the ways they can capture the bad guy, your readers won't believe that you know what you're talking about, because they'll say, "Wait a minute, that's wrong." It happens to me all the time on the podcast. People will say, "You said this, that's not true." I'm like, "Oh my God." We do our research, and I was an NYPD for 27 years. I think I know a little bit about what I'm talking about, but we're always accused of, so many people poo-pooed that DNA on the button of the knife sheath in the Idaho 4 case, that it wasn't good enough for them. And there's even some now that, after Brian Koberger, who was the defendant, pled guilty 4 times, said yes, he killed each and every one of them, there are still people that believe he didn't do it.
Yeah. I think, what you're saying about technology, readers, anybody who reads a book, it means they're intelligent. The mere fact that you're reading means you're smart. And I think readers can tell very quickly if an author knows what he or she is writing about, if they know the subject. It kind of, you get that ring of truth that comes through. And I think it's incredibly important. I mean, I'm delighted. I get letters regularly from police officers around the world saying, "Oh, we started reading you because we heard you're the guy who gets it right." And I do, but I have a real life detective. He's retired now, but we've worked together for 24 years. He reads every Roy Grace novel, about every 100 pages, and tells me how Roy would think and act. And he's introduced me to police officers around the world over the years. Because I love spending time with the police. I think police officers do see more of human life in your career than anybody else does. You see often, I know it's most of it's the dark side, but I find that absolutely fascinating. And also, I don't know, I don't think I've ever met a police officer who's told me that their views on life have not changed since they joined the force. I mean, when you first joined the force to the time when you left it, did you have a different perspective on human beings?
I do, but at the same time, I try to, cops are accused of being negative in their outlook on life, and I think I'm exactly the opposite. I realize how precious life is, and that I've seen the worst of people, but I've also seen the best in people. So I really can appreciate my own life, and the human condition. I'll put it that way. I appreciate the human condition a lot more than before I became, a police officer, then a sergeant, then a detective sergeant. And yeah, you see a lot of horrors, and that can even make you stronger, or it can destroy you.
Yeah, I think people. One of the things that I'm a great supporter of the police, and I think 2 important points. One is, people forget that police officers are not highly paid. It's a vocation, and police officers actually can make a difference to people's lives. But when they leave home, in the morning, their other half doesn't know if they're going to come back with their face intact or come back at home, come back at all. But also, you see stuff that most people never, fortunately, will ever have to see. At the same time, then you go home and you have to bathe the kids and read them stories. People only see one side of the police. They don't see the human being behind the uniform, or the human being that's had to deal with this terrible homicide and then go home and deal with some problem with the kid and their homework. I find that fascinating, the whole rounded life of police officers, and I try to portray that in my writing.
Peter, and I think you hit it on the head with that, but there's an expression on the police department: you can't unsee something, and something that is that disturbing, you can never get it out of your, the pictures in your brain that pop up while you're sleeping, pop up when you're, reading a book to your kid, pop up at some family event. They're always like that thing playing in the back of your mind that you're like, whoa, where did that come from again? It just pops
Yeah.
into your mind. I remember during the 9/11 attacks, I worked at the morgue. I wasn't assigned to the morgue, but early on, I worked several tours at the morgue. I saw things that I never saw in my life, and hopefully will never, ever see again. And it was very difficult to see, fellow New Yorkers, NYPD cops, firemen being brought in, and the conditions of the bodies were not like anything I had ever seen before. And again, as they say, you can't unsee that.
Yeah. And I really try to portray all police in my Roy Grace books with respect that recognizes that. The former head of the Met, our senior police officer in England, said a few years back, he said, people don't really understand that wearing a uniform does not protect you from trauma.
No, not at all. I think the police service has one of the highest rates of suicide of any job.
Yeah, I'm patron of a charity here which helps police officers suffering some of stress and trauma, and because they do. I mean, another great quote from another senior police officer was, the police are ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
Yeah, absolutely. And while civilians run away, the police run toward the danger, right? Yeah. I've heard that a million times too, and it happens to be true.
Yeah.
I had a robber one time say that to me. I was in plain clothes with my partner, and pardon these war stories, they just pop into my head. Anyway, he pulls out a 12-inch knife and he puts it to this woman's back who's wearing a fur coat. He rips her to the ground, takes her fur coat, and he starts running north it was West End Avenue in Manhattan. So my partner and I get out on foot. I'm chasing him. I was the younger of the two cops. And my partner kept chasing him in the car, which is the smartest thing because I've never seen a human being outrun a Chevy, So anyway, we catch the guy. And I said to him, I go, how did you know we were the police? Because we were in plain clothes. He goes, most people run away from a robbery. He goes, you were running toward the robbery. I was like, that was the greatest compliment I ever got from a perp in my life, there's always,
you're the nicest man who ever arrested me.
That's right. There's always humor in it somewhere, one of the things, and your main character, of course, Detective Superintendent Roy Grace. And we don't have that rank on the NYPD. So I looked it up, and really, a superintendent is a big boss. He's either like the equivalent of the rank of inspector or deputy chief on the NYPD. He actually runs an investigative unit. So I found that to be interesting. In New York City, detectives are either detective investigators, and they have 3 grades. Third is the lowest grade, second in the middle, and first grade gets the equivalent of lieutenant's pay. So there's still the rank of police officer. So people erroneously think that detectives on the NYPD are bosses. They're not. They're not bosses. They are investigators. And they have detective specialists and stuff like that. But when I saw detective superintendent, I was like, what the heck is that? And then
he's pretty senior, but a lot of and he's not unique. A lot of police officers still love actually being what we call being a copper, getting out, you know, and getting stuck into an investigation. There is a danger. A lot of them, they join the police partly because they love the adrenaline rush, partly because they love getting involved in fighting crime and solving crime, and then they get promoted and they become desk jockeys. And Roy Grace, although he's been promoted, he's put a stop. He doesn't want to go any higher because he does not want to ever stop being operational as much as he can be.
That is absolutely the truth. And, like the NYPD, if you want to be a boss, you have to take tests, civil service tests, and pass the test. And then you will get appointed to that rank if you score high enough. But again, like you say, promotion to sergeant. Sergeants can still go out there and fight crime and be on the street and all of that stuff. Lieutenants gets a little more administrative. Captains are very much more administrative. And as you go up, deputy inspector, deputy chief, assistant chief, and then bureau chief, they're all, they basically are paper pushers. The way you do it. Desk jockey. I like that term too. A desk jockey. Anyway, I want to go to a quick commercial. So if you have to get a drink of water or go to the bathroom, this is the time to do it. And now a word from our sponsor. FanDuel's got an offer you don't want to miss this NFL season. New customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet $5, and if it wins, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. You can build parlays, bet player props, ride the live lines, whatever your style. FanDuel has you covered. The NFL season is here. The only question is, are you ready to play? You must be 21 years or older and present in select states for Kansas and affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus and present in D.C., Kentucky, or Wyoming. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbookfanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 1-800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NEW YORK or text HOPE New York in New York. The guest is Peter James. Peter has written 36 novels, including the crime thriller series featuring Brighton-based detective superintendent Roy Grace, which have sold 21 million copies worldwide and have given 21 consecutive UK Sunday Times number ones, as well as number ones in Germany, France, Russia, and Canada. And he is also a New York Times bestseller. James' books have been translated into 38 languages. In the UK and the US, they are published by Macmillan Publishers. In 1993, Penguin Books published his novel Host on 2 floppy disks. It has been called the world's first electronic novel, and a copy of it is in the Science Museum. James has written supernatural thrillers, spy fiction, science-based thrillers, a children's novel, and the novella The Perfect Murder, which was 15 weeks at number 1 in iBooks and 45 weeks in their top 10, was adapted by Sean McKenna into a stage play, which had a smash hit tour in 2014 and returned to stage in 2016. Subsequent stage adaptations of his novels, all also by Sean McKenna, include Dead Simple, Not Dead Enough, and The House on the Cold Hill, have also sell-out national tours. Looking Good Dead and Wish You Were Here, Wish You Were Dead have grossed over 17 million at the UK box office and have been successful in many countries abroad. The 7th stage play, Picture You Dead, starts on national tour in February 2025. Peter, it sounds like you're pretty damn busy. It doesn't sound like you want to stop and smell the roses. That smelling the roses is writing to you.
No, I love it. I love writing. And Grace, of course, is on television as well. You get it on BritBox in America. There's 5 seasons so far, and the 6th season's just finished shooting, which will be out next year. But I love working. I love writing. I love learning stuff. I tend to kind of write what I love to read.
It's amazing to me that to me, like a writer that writes books, writes screenplays, or a songwriter, to me, they are the most talented people on this earth because they're creating the characters. They're creating something that can touch more lives than anything else if you're successful at it, obviously. You think of even great songwriters, how many people across the world will listen to their songs or read their lyrics. And in the case of you, how many 23 million copies sold? That's no slouch, You're doing pretty damn well. And how do you feel about, being able to touch people's lives in that way?
The nicest thing is when I get told many times that, thank you, you got my husband back into reading, or you got my son into reading, or you got me back into reading. And that is a really amazing thing. And I regularly get asked to do a video to somebody who is terminally ill, who's maybe reading one of my books and wants to get to the end. And I find that extraordinary, and that it'll give them a bit of joy. And that's an extraordinary thing, to be able to touch people's lives in that way. I've always written the way I like to read, and I tend to read like I think most of us. I'm tired, I'm in bed, so I write short chapters. I write relatively short sentences. I think if I pick up a book and the next chapter is 53 pages long, I think, I'll have that tomorrow. But if I pick up the book and it's 1.5 pages, I think, I'll just read that. Oh, the next chapter, that's only 2 pages. I'll read that. Before you know it, it's 3 a.m. I'm still reading.
Right.
So I try to write in a way that makes it easy and fun. I think reading should be fun. It shouldn't be a challenge. And that's one of the great things that I think Queen Camilla is doing right now, is that she is encouraging people to enjoy reading. She's not elitist. She's not saying, you've got to read high fiction. She just says, read a crime novel, have fun. Or read Jane Austen, have fun. Read high literature if you want, but just read. And her great catchphrase is, because when we read, everything changes.
That's great. I think it's been proven by psychologists that reading or playing an instrument or doing something like that really helps your brain. It's like a brain exercise, and it maybe even prevents you as you get older from getting dementia or something like that, because you're keeping your brain occupied. You're keeping it growing. I noticed that when I used to teach college when I retired from the police department. And when you're in academia, you're sort of up on the newest words, the newest this, the newest. I find my vocabulary isn't as good as it used to be because I'm not engaged as much with the academic world, and I'm not maybe perhaps reading as much as I should. And it absolutely helps your vocabulary too.
Yeah. I mean, she's funded a lot of research, and they've discovered the first finding is that if you read just 5 minutes a day, it has a massive impact on both your mental health and on your physical well-being. Reading does something to us. It's really transformative.
Yeah, that's amazing. With these, we'll get back to some of these characters. Do you ever? Well, actually, that's a stupid question because you must. But writing dialogue, I would expect dialogue is more in like a screenplay. However, you have to write dialogue in your books when characters are having a conversation.
Yeah, and the important thing always with writing. I mean, I walk around having conversations with myself. I think people think I'm mad. If I go for a walk with the dogs, I'll be sort of having a conversation with 2 characters in my books. And again, I had actually on The Hawk is Dead, I had huge amount of, because I made a conscious decision in setting the book largely behind the scenes in Buckingham Palace, that I wanted to make the book feel real. So I gave the key roles in the palace, like the master of the royal household, the keeper of the privy purse, the Lord Chamberlain, I gave them, their real titles, but I made the characters fictitious. But I thought I cannot make King Charles and Queen Camilla fictitious because the book won't feel real. I could hardly call him, King Eric and Queen Doris. That would not have a ring. So I took the step of basically creating real characters and putting words in their mouth. And I had a lot of help. I talked to the Queen quite often, and I asked her, how, because the second chapter in the book is King Charles and Queen Camilla having breakfast. And I said to her, what happens at breakfast? And as a result, I've got a scene in the book where she's having breakfast and the king is working on a speech and she feeds her dog some toast under the table. And I remember seeing her last July, and she said, "How's the book coming along?" I said, "Well, I've got you being quite heroic, Your Majesty. You help everybody get off the train when it's derailed." She said, "I don't know if I would be that heroic." But I had, all the way through, I had members of the royal household reading the relevant chapters in which either the king or because I had the Queen showing Roy Grace around some of her favorite paintings in the palace. And there's lots of scenes with them talking. So I had a lot of help just getting the right, how they speak, what they would say, even how they're addressed, because they're not, although they're known as king and queen, the staff refer to them much more colloquially. They're known as the boss, or the principal, or HMK and HMQ is the most common one. But when I finished the book and I was editing it in February this year, and I suddenly thought, I have put words into the king and the queen's mouth. I've got to let the queen read it, because if there's anything she doesn't like, now's the time I can change it. Right. So my publishers bound a copy of the book up beautifully, a really early uncorrected proof. They bound it in black and they put embossed gold on the cover, 001. And I had it hand delivered to the Queen, and I said, "Your Majesty, if there's anything that you're not happy with, now is the time I can change things." And I got invited to Clarence House, where they live, a week later. And I didn't sleep the night before. I thought, she's going to come up to me, she's going to tell me she hates it and I can't publish it. Anyway, so I arrive at Clarence House, and she came up with a big smile on her face. She said, "I absolutely love it." I said, "Wow." I said, "Is there anything you want changed at all, Your Majesty?" She said, "Not one word." And she's now calling one or two, some of the members of the household by the names I've given them in the book.
That's fantastic. Now, Peter, do you ever have problems, say, because some of your books are becoming TV shows? Do you ever get TV producers want to change things to make them more perhaps politically correct? I've had two FBI agents that I know. I won't say their names here. Probably people already know, but they work on a TV show, and one of them they had this great idea for a police series, and the producers wanted to change so many things that was so important to the story in their minds that they said, "No, we're not changing that." They wanted to make it more politically correct, more woke, if you will. And they couldn't handle it.
It is a problem because I'm always trying to portray the way people speak accurately, and I'm sure you've used it many times. I'm not sure what the expression is in the United States, but in England we call it gallows humor. It's when the police make dark jokes out of a terrible situation. It's a coping mechanism.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you said there's stuff that you can never unsee, and one way of dealing with that is to make jokes, and if you just can't have that on television, I've been in situations where I've seen some terrible sights. I remember one time we went to it was a car that rolled over into a field, and this guy inside it had been impaled by a fence post. One of the police officers said his wife only sent him out for a steak. Can't have that on television. It's like it would just drive everybody nuts. And also, I've got my most popular character in the books is next to Roy Grace. The one I get the most correspondence about is a detective sergeant called Norman Potting. And Norman is real old school, you know, he's like in his 50s, he's got a comb over, he's overweight. His love life is a complete disaster. And he's completely politically incorrect. And we had to tone him right down for the television, which I wasn't happy about because he was real. Yeah,
Right.
that's how it is. Yeah, and you know the police force aren't perfect people, always with the best manners, as I'm sure you'll agree. You know, they have
No,
attitude.
I mean they're a part of society. They're a part of the population, and there's cops that are in great shape. There's fat cops. There's politically incorrect cops. There's cops that are slobs. There's cops that are. So yeah, they're part of the whole population. Peter, it reminded me when you said, well, you said gallows humor. We said macabre. Could be macabre humor, but I had this. I had one time on the Upper West Side, this one-legged guy shot and killed somebody, and the detective captain came to the scene, and I was the sergeant on the scene, and he comes up to me, and he goes, "What are they saying about the guy who shot him?" And I said, "Well, they're saying he doesn't have a leg to stand on." He didn't even crack a smile. He was trying not to, and then he just burst into laughter because I couldn't resist that joke. It was just too easy,
I love it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you consume other like police series, but to me, one of the greatest police shows I've ever seen was The Wire on HBO.
Oh, yeah, that was great. Yeah.
And one of the reasons I loved it so much is because the writers got the language of the street exact so well. It was just amazing. I was like, I haven't even heard some of these expressions because it was Baltimore. This isn't every area has their own street lingo. You feel me? I didn't hear that. You feel me? He's strapped. They used all the lingo of the street. I was like, this is great. And the characters were such great actors also.
It was a really good show. In terms of other authors that I read, I like Michael Connolly a lot because he's I consider him one of the guys who gets it right too. He's a former court reporter. We did an event together in LA some years ago, but I enjoy his characters a lot. But I can only read other police stuff or only watch police series if it's reasonably accurate. Otherwise, I just get angry.
Exactly.
I'm shouting at the screen.
Someone from the chat is asking a question of you. Bill, ask him about his experience with actor Peter Sellers. Thanks. So I don't know if you want to answer that. What has your experience with Peter Sellers been?
Well, I made a movie with him long time, a really bad film. But also I liked him a lot, but he could be very difficult. And I had back in 1974, we made a TV commercial. It was for Benson Hedges Gold cigarettes. And it was Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan. I don't know if you know him in America.
I'm not sure.
Another actor called James Villiers. And Peter Sellers was being paid. We were filming it in Cyprus, and we only had Sellers for one day. Then he was off to Australia to make a movie. And he was being paid the highest amount of money ever paid to an actor for one day's work at the time. I think it was like $100,000 back in 1974.
Right.
And the whole TV commercial was basically Peter Sellers, Spike Milligan, and this guy called Jeremy Villiers, who's an English character actor who always played like old Etonian villains, quite posh villains. They were raiding a bonded warehouse in Cyprus. And the idea was that Peter Sellers was on guard outside, smoking a cigarette. Spike Milligan goes in and he's got a raincoat, and underneath it all his belt pack, straps. And he starts taking the cigarettes. Instead of being gold ingots, it's packets of the cigarettes, and he stuffs them in the pouches. He gets heavier and heavier, and the alarm rings, And he runs out the warehouse, down the jetty, into the boat, and goes straight through the bottom of the boat. That was the commercial. And we're told, Sellers flies in at 7 a.m, and we're told literally we have him till 7 p.m, and he's gone. So the director says, "Okay, Peter, you're standing outside the warehouse. You look nervous. You light the cigarette." And Sellers says, "I'm sorry, I've decided I'm against smoking." Okay, well, you are actually here being paid the highest amount of money ever paid for one day's work to do a cigarette commercial. He won't budge. I phone his agent in London, and his agent says, "Yeah, I'm sorry, Peter can be tricky sometimes." So we have a complete standoff. The client with a big agency, Collett Dickinson Pierce, and we get to about 11 o'clock. Nothing's happened. And the agent said, "Look, why don't we just swap it around?" So Spike Milligan smokes a cigarette. Peter goes in the warehouse and takes the. So we get Spike Milligan. He says, "Sorry to argue with my friend Peter. I'm not smoking." We get to like about lunchtime, and Jerry Mavillier said, "Look, why the fuck I'll smoke it." And it went on. It won every award on the planet. It was like,
oh God,
Peter Sellers is lovely, but he could be very tricky indeed.
Yeah, well, those are the people I think that are a nightmare to work with. But he has the very most famous joke ever told in a movie, and that's of course the one where he asks, "Does your dog bite?" The punchline. I love that. I love that. It's just, that's the technique in comedy called misdirection. And you have to laugh because you're tricked, And for those that don't know what he says, "Does your dog bite?" And the guy says no. He goes to pet the dog bites him, and it goes, "I thought you said your dog didn't bite." He goes, "That is not my dog." Right? I mean, every time I hear it, I've heard it. It's just funny as hell,
He was just absolutely. I loved him to bits as a comedian. I thought he was one of the funniest guys ever lived.
He was great. Yeah, absolutely. So we're coming close to that hour mark. So, Protect the Crown, Peter James, The Hawk is Dead. What do you want people to know about The Hawk is Dead, and why they absolutely have to read this book?
Okay, well, let's start out. I think it's a real fun thriller. It starts, as we've already said, with Queen on a train, traveling on the Royal train to Brighton. And they use the Royal train as a kind of hotel on wheels if they're going to be away from London for a couple of nights. They park it in a siding, and it's guarded. And guarded a bit too well, because there's actually a bullet hole in the dining car that was made by a Royal Protection Officer with firing a Glock a few years ago. And the train is derailed, and a senior member of the royal household is then shot dead by a sniper. Roy Grace basically goes to Buckingham Palace to start investigating. The Queen is a key witness, and then there's another murder inside the palace, followed by a third. And the story is, at one level, it's a real, I think, page-turning, fast-paced thriller. On the other hand, along with that is I've had the most, as I've said, tremendous access into Buckingham Palace. And there's tons of stuff about the kind of inner workings of the royal household, about the just even the attitudes. It's like behind the facade of this fantastic building is a hotbed of jealousies and envy. Everybody, there's different levels of long service medal, and everybody covets them, almost to the point of being prepared to kill for one. Well, somebody does actually kill for one in the book. And they also, it's wonderful little, because they're doing this huge renovation, and everybody at the moment has their own little office. And they have their paintings, because the Royal Collection Trust has this vast collection of artwork, which it holds on behalf of the nation. But it's on display not just in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, but in the rooms. And I was talking to one chap, and he was really angry about being moved from his office into an open plan office. He said, "It's a wonderful night." He said, "Where am I going to put my Canaletto?" And that is a high-class problem.
You get to see the inside story of the human condition right inside Buckingham Palace. Just
It's
absolutely
wonderful. Yeah. There's
amazing.
jealousies about who's in uniform, not in uniform. And,
Right. Who has the best access
yeah.
to the queen and the king, right? All of those
Yeah.
things. I can imagine the jealousy.
And then I discovered what in creating the story, I thought, because the palace is in disarray, I thought it'd be fun to have a group of conspirators in the palace who are using the fact that everything's in disarray to steal high-value items of art and sell them on the dark web. And then I discovered a footman had actually done this. This guy stole $150,000 worth of artworks. And the silly idiot, he put them on eBay. And he laid them out on his bed cover in the in his room in the Royal Mews, and they've all got the same bed cover. So he's now in jail.
He's a master criminal, that's for sure, right?
Yeah.
Peter, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It was really a great interview. I think a lot of people are going to buy your book. It sounds fascinating. In fact, I'm going to pick it up. And not just the fact that the book's great, but they get to increase their brain power through reading. We have to keep selling that. So, folks, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories on behalf of myself and Peter James. Have a great day, everyone, and God bless.
Thank you, Bill.
Great interview.
One episode just ain't enough.